right, we're going live on YouTube. All right, we're going live. All right, there we are. We're live. Welcome, everybody. We're going to wait for some people to join before we get really started, but we'll do a proper introduction to our special guest today as well. This is the Space Water Podcast, everybody, sponsored by the MysticalSpiralStore.com. Our great guest today, I'm so excited to once again speak with Mr. Gary Wayne, longtime friend of the show and guest on all of my different radio shows and podcasts over the years. And Gary is a Christian contrarian. He's a best-selling author. He's an expert on Christian and ancient writings. And he's an all-around great guy and really an incredible man to be able to share some time with and pick his brain and some of his also perspective on things. And not only is he influencing and making people aware of some of the hidden mysteries of the Bible and different things all over the world related to religion and spirituality. But he's also helping non-Christians learn things that they didn't understand about religion and Christianity. And that's incredible. So not only is he affecting the Christian community, but he's affecting non-Christians, and he's influencing the community with a lot of his knowledge. And it's a pleasure to be able to see him grow over the years as well and become more popular. And almost all of my followers have one, if not both, of his Genesis 6 conspiracy books. So once again, everybody, this is Mr. Gary Wayne. You can find him at Genesis6conspiracy.com. He'll be on audio again. Next time he's on, he'll probably be back on video for us. So I will be pulling up on his website in the background when he's talking, and maybe even some pictures associated with what we're talking about. But we're going to go deep today. We're going to be talking about the Book of Giants, possible its relation to some other scriptures like the Book of Revelation, and some of the people that's talked about in these books and some of the prophets discussed, and some of the revelations and prophecies people have had related to Christianity and other religions from our ancient past that are still affecting what's transpiring today. So welcome, Gary. I'm glad to have you back on the Space Water Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be here with you today, and really liked some of the opening comments that you were talking about in terms of not necessarily, what my role is, but just sort of the overall kind of concept that it doesn't really matter from trying to understand where we came from, why we're here, what's going on today, and where we're going. Has anything to do with my biases necessarily or specifically as a Christian, or whether or not you're agnostic, whether or not you're secular, whether or not you're polytheist in any form or way, or if you're one of the other monotheist religions. So it doesn't really matter in terms of that, from trying to understand those three categories that we're talking about, because we have this common history. We have this common destiny. And it's important to understand that history and prehistory, what's going on in today's crazy world and where we're going, it's all interconnected. So these events are recorded through different lenses throughout history and even today, and what that outcome is going to be. So it's important to understand that we have that common history, and that as you're trying to figure out things, there is a way of doing it that I think really helps, but you have to understand the chronology of history and not necessarily the brainwashing of science, which is not necessarily looking at all of the evidence because it doesn't fit a preconceived conclusion that they're promoting. So we have to understand that even though they're reporting science reports on some aspects, they don't report on all aspects, because if it doesn't support their their theory, then they dismiss it. Or if it's an artifact that's out of place, they call them UPARTs, out of place artifacts. And they will not mention them, they will not display them, and they will not include them in sort of the greater sort of context. So I think that's the research that I think people find from whatever belief system that you come from, that my research sort of touches on. And if it converts people to Christians, good. Or if it gets them to look at the biblical recollection, terrific. But I'm here to present information and to help people understand why we're here. So, but I do discuss from a very, very strong Christian bias. And I've done my research and I've kind of made my conclusions, and that's all I would ask anybody to do, because no decision is a decision. So find out why you believe what you believe, and then be able to try and communicate that at appropriate times.
I always like that quote of yours, no decision is that we should make a Gary Wayne Genesis 6 conspiracy t-shirt. No decision is a decision. Genesis6conspiracy.com on the back. Yeah.
Yeah, that would make a good
That's a
t-shirt,
cool
wouldn't
t-shirt. I
it?
love that. I love your quote. That I love that you say that, and because that's important, that you know that's so true. If you're just gonna say, you know what, I don't want to go and dig deep spiritually. I don't want to spend the time into doing this, and I'm just gonna stay out of it all. That's you are deciding, and in my opinion, that's almost like Satan winning in a way, right? So the evil forces got that's like chalk one up for them,
Yeah,
because you're not on the side of the light, then you're not on the side of humanity and of
yeah,
prospering, and things like that. So that's just as bad as being on the side of the dark is making no decision, in my opinion.
yeah. And it's important to understand that. So, and again, whatever side that you believe is the correct side, that's important to you, but understand why you made that decision. And so, and you can make a decision not to believe in anything, right? I mean, I get that. I don't agree with it, but I get that. But at least you've made a decision. But a non-decision is thinking that, well, it's kind of like I'll see which side wins out, and hopefully I'll be part of the winning side or the good side, right? Well, you're not. You're not part of any side. And this is not about being divisive. This is we live in a world that doesn't make sense from a way that we're told it's supposed to make sense. And everybody's got this sort of feeling deep down that something's not right. And that's a feeling that's been with us all throughout our history, and will be right through to the end times, if indeed we're in the fig tree generation, which I think we are. So it's going to be continually being part of us. But when you're feeling that something's not right and you're looking for answers, now that really says, okay, you're on the right path, because now you're starting to ask questions. But are you good at asking good analytical and critical questions, because you've been trained through the brainwashing of education and media not to ask the good questions, because the debate is over. And that's exactly where they want you, like a mushroom.
That's so true, Gary. I Before we even get started, that's a good point. I think it would be interesting for people to understand. Gary, I can't even tell you how many, because I live right behind the Salesians of Don Bosco Retreat Center. Like, it's right behind where we live, and I grew up in this area. So even when I went to nursery school, I went to the Children of Mary Nursery School, and it's like a big Catholic retreat center for brothers and monks and all these different people that have come through here since I'm a kid. And I've had conversations with priests, right, that have been priests for 30 years, right? And I've asked them one simple question sometimes that ends up shattering their whole everything. Like, they realize, and I start usually when we start, if we get further in conversation, I say to this, Gary, I say something to the effect like, where, like, well, have you guys really, when you went to seminary school, did you went into some of, like, the hidden teachings of the Bible that maybe they don't really bring up? Oh, of course we have. right? So I always say, well, why did God bring the flood? And they usually say, oh, because he was eliminating bad on earth or something like that. Never do they ever say anything about Nephilim. So I will say, I said, well, specifically they talk about how, fallen angels came down, took women as wives, and created a race of giants called the Nephilim. And they were like, oh, usually if they even heard of it, they talk about how they were just giants of wisdom. It's an allegory, and they don't go any further. But then I start to talk about, like, who was Goliath and his brothers, and Og and all of these people, and it usually shatters their whole. They don't they Most priests don't even know about the Nephilim and a race of giants and the specific contamination that was on the earth. And that to
I know.
me is incredible.
Well, it just shows you the power of that indoctrination that's prepared the people to be dumbed down, including the people that are leading the flocks in the churches. And we saw the lack of leadership in the last pestilence. And you should expect that type of poor leadership going forward. And the reason why priests and ministers and on the Protestant side, deacons and all the other different positions, they don't know about prehistory and prophecy is because in the seminary schools, both Catholic and Protestant, they're not taught this. In fact, they're told not to talk about it. And that they're also instructed, and many Christians who might be listening in the audience today might have experienced it. If they go and ask these questions about the flood, about the fallen angels, or about end time prophecy, they're told to stop asking those questions. And if you don't, you're going to have to leave the church. So this is the type of leadership that people are going to be relying on who know nothing about why we're here and where we're going. They teach some terrific values in the churches, but they don't teach the whole context of the Bible. And it's the whole context that we need to understand so that we know what our raison d'etre is and what our destiny is and why we're here. And it's problematic. So I actually get a lot of ministers that get a hold of me and say, I'm glad you're teaching this. I always knew there was more to this. We're told not to do it. Can you send me some information?
Wow,
And
that's
there's more.
that's incredible. How powerful is that?
Yeah, and there's more and more ministers, and I would even say even in the Catholic community from the priest side, there's more and more waking up to this to a certain degree. But it's not going to be enough with what's coming. And so Christians are going to have to, and other people as well, you're going to have to, in your own way, try and learn more yourself from a Christian from within the Bible. From a non-Christian, I would encourage you to get familiar with the Bible's perspective on what's coming and help you make those decisions and prepare. And Christians, you need to put on the full armor of God for what's coming at us, because we cannot imagine what is coming. It is that crazy. And it's like, and it's so pertinent to the topic that you're going to be getting into detail today. It's like Ecclesiastes 1 that I like to refer to quite often. And it's a standard doctrine that's not taught in the churches, even though it just sums things up so well. And it's also a doctrine of polytheism. It's just said a little bit differently and interpreted it a little bit differently with the outcome, particularly. But Ecclesiastic 1 talks about there is nothing new under the sun. What was will be again. And as it moves on into the passage, it says the understanding and the realization of this, paraphrasing it, only brings grief and sorrow. So when Jesus is talking about the end time as part of the overarching signs in the fig tree generation, it's going to be like the generation or the days of Noah. We should be learning more about it, and our ministers are not teaching about that. So that's why in book 1, I talk about the days of Noah, and chapter 1 is devoted to what that days of Noah that Jesus is talking about is referring to in its fuller context. And that it'll tell you why the flood had come. It'll tell you what had caused the corruption. It'll tell you what is the corruption that is being repeated to this day, because what happened then was basically an intercession, in my opinion, to prevent the world being destroyed by fire with the technology that they had, because the Second Peter 3 talks about that's reserved for the end time. And it's the same fire as it talks about in Second Peter 3, is this destruction that happened sometime in the beginning. And in the beginning is first introduced in Genesis 1:1-2. And that is at the time just after the creation of the angels, as Psalms 104 lines up with that in its understanding of creation. And this destruction by fire that destroyed the earth down to what I think are the pillars. And then the earth had to be renewed. So when Second Peter is talking about the earth that is in the water and out of the water that perished, understand that's not the flood, because the whole earth didn't perish. The whole world died. And if you had that type of destruction by fire, you'd have a collapsing of the firmament, or the waters above down to waters below. And that when you do the renewal of the earth, as Psalms 104 talks about, you would have to separate that firmament to create um, the environment for life to create, and that the waters would dry up to a certain degree and present the earth, just as you have this repeated all around the world with the age of chaos, that where you have the separation, and it's understood in Lord of the Rings as Middle Earth is where life is going to be planted on. And this is the world that became totally corrupted, completely corrupted, which is the Hebrew word shakoth, which means perverted, destroyed. Words like decay, words that means it was ruined. And so we need to understand that we're doing the same thing to the earth today. And this is just part of that cycle. So I know that was sort of a long sort of rant on that. So I'll just sort of end it that it's important that everybody understand what has happened, what is going on, and where we're going. And that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I mean, people are in the comment, and we welcome all questions, everybody. I know sometimes you might not want to interrupt the flow me and Gary get into, but Gary and myself, we welcome all questions anytime. So don't feel embarrassed. No matter how simple or how intricate you want, you can ask any questions. And yeah, people are talking about how society feels so crazy, Gary. And I've witnessed it myself. Just going to the bank and having people get crazy on lines because they're waiting. And I don't talk about too much my personal life on here with you when we're live, but like I've done martial arts and even competed in kickboxing and Muay Thai in my life. So I wrestled in school. So like I'm not a person that tries to prove myself and fight on the street ever. So like I try to calm situations down. And Gary, in the last 2 weeks, I've calmed 3 situations down at banks, at uh just places where people are just lashing out at women too. Like a man going irate at a woman because they're not taking long enough at the bank or whatever with their money and things like that. It's really accelerating. You could see it, and not only is it the tension in people, it's the tension with the planet. I mean, worldwide earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, solar eruptions. I mean, everything. It seems like it's hitting the planet, and the planet is looking to like renew itself in some way. It's incredible what's transpiring, and I think that the prophecies that we're going to get into, people are going to see that it might be discussing, even in the book of Revelation, actually our last 2,000 plus years of history since Christ.
Yeah, I think Revelation is a unique prophecy, and it's a vision prophecy, and it's a dual prophecy. And it's a vision prophecy in the same sort of manner that Ezekiel had, and other prophets, where they're seeing something and they're writing it down, right? And that's what John's doing here. But it's also a dual prophecy. And some of the most cryptic prophecies in the Old Testament are like dual prophecies. So, like Daniel, for example, has visions of these great beasts, but he's not really talking about a dual prophecy. The dual prophecies are mostly in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah. Not saying all of them, I'm just saying most of them. And the difference between them is that you have in a dual prophecy, you have important information in prehistory that helps you understand the context. So Isaiah 14, for example, or Ezekiel 28, when it's talking about Satan, is a classic sort of example, or Jeremiah 51, where it's talking about Babylon. And and then it's a prophecy that is for the time of the prophet. So in Isaiah, while the northern kingdom was still in place in Assyria, and he's even reaching into the empire of Babylon that's going to come. And but not all the prophecies that are in those dual prophecies are fulfilled. And so some of them are reserved for the end time, like the Assyrian end of the prophet, or Satan going to the pit prison and things like that are in some of these important prophecies. And so in Revelation, you have something very similar to that. And particularly in the first churches that you're talking about in that church age, you have John of Patmos, who is writing down all of this vision, but presenting throne room images and things like that. That's important to sort of understand where we're coming from. And also you have references throughout Revelation that you have to go into prehistory to define. And then you have prophecies for the seven churches that aren't all fulfilled in the time of the prophet. Parts of them are, but parts of them are for the end time, and parts of them you can make a very good argument for throughout the church history. And so this is a typical sort of dual prophecy. And so when we look at Revelation and the churches you could easily say those seven churches were in place, and we have historical evidence, and some of those things happened. We have historical evidence for that. And then you can look at the order that those churches are in, and they lay out a chronology of the church time in terms of the churches evolving right up to to today. And that when we look at some of those prophecies, there are things that are put in each of the churches, like a reference to Jezebel as the prophetess, as an association, I think, with the woman of Babylon, and the Sibylline connection, as well as you get into that from other polytheist accountings,
She hated him,
and
right?
or the 10 days of tribulation. Yeah, the 10 days of tribulation that are prophesied, which is 10 years of tribulation. So the last 7 years, but 3 years before. So I think you can make that a very good case that that is a dual prophecy and a vision prophecy combined, which is, very kind of unique in that sort of aspect. And that um, it helps us to understand what has happened since the time of John, and then how you get a chronology even of the end time within those prophecies for the churches, not for Judah and Israel, but for the churches, as to how things are going to play out in the last, say, fig tree generation, and particularly the last 10 years and the last 7 years. And those are with unfulfilled prophecies. I have a great document on this if people want to get a hold of me, and then I'll talk quite a bit about it in book 2 in terms of the prophetic chronology.
I have a couple of questions in the chat room as well, Gary. So are we, and then I mean we can should we take the questions first, or should we save them?
We can take questions.
All right, cool. We'll take. All right, there's a few of them. We have Colby Walker and Zeralath Immortal. Zeralath says he has a few questions. First was, is there anything we have not yet done, like the days of Noah, to see before the end? Maybe I'm not
Yeah,
reading.
that's a little Yeah, that's a little bit unclear, but is all I mean, you might be asking, is everything in place to fulfill the days of Noah?
Yeah, like is
And I
there,
would
if
say,
like we
yeah,
haven't done anything yet? Yeah, that we need
yeah.
to do.
And I would say that we're not quite fully complete yet. So one of the things that we haven't seen yet is we haven't seen the Watchers walk amongst us like they did before the flood, and then again shortly after the flood with the
Hmm.
offspring gods and the creation of the giants both before and after the flood. So we haven't seen that. For me, I don't necessarily have to see a new recreation of giants, because you have the descendants of the giants and the royales, um, that will try and bring the same thing about again, because they're the visible ones working for the invisible ones of the celestial mafia godfathers, as I like to talk about,
Yeah.
from my sense of humor and from my Christian biases.
That's another
And
shirt. That's another shirt right there.
yeah, yes, yes. And also, um, we haven't seen, you haven't seen, and we don't need those giants, but it would seem likely that we're going to see giants in some form, whether or not they were saved somehow in the earth, off the earth, in stasis, or there is a recreation as we get closer to the end time, because the ones who weren't impassioned both before and after the flood will have not much yet to lose, so they may recreate these giants as well. But somehow, some way, I think we'll see that. And you also have the demons that need oikotarians or dwelling places yet that the technology is just catching up to, so that they would have a soul and a body created in this physical world so that they can interact again to be part of the end time. So again, I think we need to see those two things, and we haven't seen both before or after the flood this great universal religion of polytheism dominate. It's part of the whole hierarchy of the reign of the giants and the dualism of that religion coming back and the mother goddess at the, and as you get into the secret societies will be placed at the great level. So those are the things from the days of Noah yet that I think is to be achieved yet, and that the whole world yet isn't corrupted yet, Shakath, and that the whole world yet isn't filled with the violence caused by the giants yet. But we're getting there, and the perpetual war movement that answers to the bloodlines is trying to make that sort of come about. So we need to see all of that from a historical days of Noah sort of perspective before we can say we're at that pinnacle. But we get closer by the year. There's no doubt about that, in my opinion.
Yeah, also too, I think it's possible too that like how you mentioned that the Giants they need to reemerge, like they're going to be walking again. Maybe it's also possible they're reemerging in a different way than before, like through artificial intelligence and different aspects of our world nowadays.
All forms of different oikotarians. And there's an interesting word in the Bible called teraphim, and it is a unique kind of idol. And it was with the familiar family idols that these demonic spirits would have a dwelling place in this some sort of idol. Sometimes they're kind of in a human form. Sometimes they're not really described, but they can be carried. Sometimes they're just heads. But there's an ability, seemingly through some kind of technology, that they could use that as the oikotarian. And that's why I included all the different sort of kinds of the teraphim. And also understand the image of the beast will be a type of teraphim. Um, and that Antichrist commands the demons, as he speaks through his mouth. And we also see demons coming out through his mouth, which you could say that he sends them and commands them to do something, or just understand that from the mouth he commands those demons. So yes, they're going to have an ability to be in technology, I think. And I think that's a good example from the biblical perspective. And we see the technology being developed that I think that will house them. And they're even calling the invisible algorithms that work in behind as daemon algorithms. So I think this is with an intention
Yeah.
to create these sort of oikotarians. And we seem to have them already utilizing some of this technology in small ways to communicate to humans and to some of their followers. So I would expect to see that increase as well.
Yeah, for sure. I love the way you put it. Also, Colby Walker was saying I mean, this is a hard question to answer, but maybe from your perspective, he's saying, he feels the veil is thinning between the physical and the spiritual, like the Lord is allowing it. And then his questions are, was the dimensions of spirituality different before the flood? And how were angels able to interact in our realm? And were the dimensions different? Will the end times veils thin out between physical and spirit? And he feels that the veil's thinning now.
Yeah, and I think that veil is thinning, and that's people may not believe this, but that's a term that's used both by some Christians and by polytheists. And the veil is a small, almost insignificant barrier between dimensions. And that to get through that veil, though, you need to have a portal or maybe remove the veil completely so there's no doorways that you can just have complete sort of crossing over. And so in the days of Noah, you had not only watchers walking amongst us, both in the spirit and in the physical realm and in the physical body. So they would create a physical body as well, even though they're spirit beings, because they wanted to be able to interact physically in the world in a way that they couldn't in the spiritual sort of sense. So they need that oiketerion, the soul and the body, that is the dwelling place for the spirit. And that's how they create the DNA to pass on to humans, as in females or males, to produce giants. And they would receive physical attributes thereof. So I think just as you had the watchers walking amongst us, we get stories both before and after the flood, Baal after the flood, El before, or Kronos and Zeus. And it's the same story throughout prehistory is they would go regularly back and forth between the other world, Hades, Argatha, Sheol, all the different words for it around the world. And some of them would do it daily. And even the demigods had the ability to do that as well. And we get that in Ugaritic texts and Egyptian texts and most of the ancient writings from around the world. So I think that veil has been temporarily not stopped, but more difficult since Babel. And it was more accessible before Babel. I think there's angels that aren't in the pit prison, and I think there's demons that can go back and forth, but through specific little portals. So I think that veil does get removed, or there's way more portals and doorways that are open, and I think we're going to see this regular passing through the dimensions. And I think the alien mythos is more interdimensional than interplanetary. And I think we're going to see all sorts of creations of the fallen angels represented in the sort of Babel end time scenario of galactic species. They're going to be more interdimensional species, I think.
That was a good answer, but and it's true, and they have other questions too, like hold on. There's a whole bunch of questions that came in. Forgive me if I skipped anybody, because I know a few of you had a couple in a row. Colby, did he have another one? Oh, Zeralath, he has a few too, but this one was the next one. Will Satan, the devil, and Lucifer have distinguished roles in the end times, or remain considered one entity? Or you think they're like separate entities?
Oh, I definitely think they're the same entity. And I know a lot of people will separate that. Lucifer is Hail El in Hebrew, which is kind of a angelic name, meaning boastful and bright God, and proud God. And he has different names like Gadrael, which would be his cherubim form that Ezekiel 28 talks about while in Eden. And he's named as Gadrael, I think, in Eden, in his cherubic form. Samael in Kabbalism is his serpentine form. So he has the ability to take many different forms, at least before he was degraded to Satan. But I look at him as one individual. I look at him as being still behind the scenes right up to about the midpoint of the last 7 years. And somehow, some way, there is a more prolific recognition of Satan versus the old pantheon of the fallen angels that we have standard in all of the cultures and religions around the world. Because Babylon is destroyed at the midpoint, Antichrist introduces a new religion that his fathers did not worship. Antichrist receives his power from Satan, the devil, Lucifer, Halel, Gadriel, all the different names for Satan, the dragon, and that people will worship not only Antichrist, but also Satan in the last 3.5 years. So I think that sort of implies that he'll have a more visible role. Now, Antichrist will also say that he is God. And so what he's doing is basically saying he's the reflection of God, just as Jesus is the reflection of God in his descriptions in the New Testament. And he's in the physical form, just as Jesus came in a physical form. So he's going to be utilizing that as a conflation aspect. But he is going to be representing Satan, and Satan is still his his God that he's going to be worshiping. And what's also interesting is Satan or Antichrist is also in the book of Daniel, chapter 11. He is going to worship a secret god of fortresses in secret. So is that the female goddess and the consort of Satan, or is that Azazel, the leader of the Watchers? Because that word fortress is the Hebrew word mauz, which is rooted in az, and azaz, which is the root word for Azazel, meaning a goat god, as we understand it, as he was degraded after his crimes before the flood. So but Satan is one individual, and he's, at least from a biblical perspective, he is connected in Isaiah 14 as the one who falls from heaven as Satan, that Jesus talks about in Luke 10:18, because he saw him fall from heaven. So I think that's the smoking gun, and he just has many different names and titles, which makes it confusing.
Yeah, and by the way, I agree with that as well, and various people in the chat room agree with that as well. Angie asked, are these the demons that helped Solomon?
I'm not sure who these are, but biblically we don't get demons helping Solomon. But it is a strong belief
Hebrew.
out there that, and he was, I mean, in the Kabbalistic side, in the Quran, and in polytheism, and Solomon tends to be drafted as a powerful black magi. And very, very important figure in the Gnostics and the secret societies. And I'm not saying he didn't have the power to do so, to command demons, and in this case, to use them to help build the temple. Although I'm not so sure they needed that to do that with the knowledge that was passed on from the king of Tyre, and the education of the masons within Israel that were done to build the temple. But Solomon may have had the ability and the authority to command demons, but biblically, we don't get that. We get that in Apocrypha. We get that in outside biblical sources. So I'm open to the idea. I just can't confirm it biblically.
Yeah, I mean, I forget the demon's name. Is probably there's a reason why, and I'm glad I probably forgot it. It's not good to probably say it anyway. But there's there's stories like you said, even in Muslim stories, where he commands it with his ring. He gets some demon, and I know that like, they gave him that shamir worm to cut through blocks. It was like some sort of like maybe a
Yep.
plasma cutter or laser or who knows what it was, but it was some sort of
Yep.
shamir they called it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and it's possible. The thing is though, is that the first temple, I mean, as nice as it probably was, wasn't one of the greatest piece of architecture that was built after the flood. The Dionysian builders built all the great palaces and all the great temples, and this would be a little more humble in terms of its size and things that were put in it, and based on the instructions. So one would expect that they didn't need that extra power to do that, but It's, there's so many different accounts. I'm open to the idea, but I don't have the scripture to support it.
Yeah. And that's I'm glad you pointed that out because that is not in the Bible. I'm glad you pointed out. And I think a lot of people that are familiar with the Bible, they assume that that is in the Bible, Gary. A lot of people do think
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've had a lot of people
Yep,
think that's a story from the Bible, like the ring from Solomon controlling him and all that. Yeah.
yep, yep.
Uh,
Yeah, and there's like I say there's apocrypha, about books about Solomon that state that as well, but again, not canon. So just want to be I don't I don't have evidence to say it wasn't the case. I just don't have what I would look at as for myself as that doctrinal statement in the Bible that we could actually 100% get there.
well, this one girl, I don't know how you can answer this question, but her name is Who White Girl, and she said ask Gary about the Eluid, and apparently the giant's offspring. There's a woman who who was in contact with Bigfoot who said that they called themselves the Eluid. So I don't know how you can verify that that was somebody's own personal experience that they're saying. But I know there's all different names that they go by. Even in the book of Enoch, there's three different books of Enoch. Gary knows they're like Gregory. There's names like Ejiji that has been used, and I guess these are also like the Watchers, right, Gary? Considered so. I guess they could be. They're all different names people get, when communicating with these forces.
Yeah, and I think that that we have to be careful, especially with some of these things, names and titles that sort of come down. But if I'm understanding the question right, she might be referring to the giants in the Book of Jubilees that were referenced. Again, not from the Bible and closely associated as being related to it.
He
And
spelt it
so,
Eliud.
yes. So, and actually write about the LUE or mention them in um, book two, just so that people are aware of it and I make a reference to them. And so when we talk about, and they're also known as LEO as well, ELJO. Um, and it's talking about when it's referencing these, that when the Watchers went and took wives from the daughters of men, uh, they begat sons that they called the Nephilim, as they're called in the Book of Jubilees. And they were unlike, they were all unlike and different. So kind of like maybe different types of giants or monsters that maybe the Book of Giants is talking about in its references. But we don't get a lot more information. And it says they devoured one another, and the giants slew the Nephil, which would be the Nephilim, I think, as well. As so, there's again seems to be different kinds of giants that this is referring to, and also slew the Elio, and the Elio is a type of giant, but also understood in other parts as maybe being the offspring of giants and humans before the flood. So there's two different aspects. They could be understood as a giant with the little that were written of them, or they could be hybrid human and giants before the flood, but not showing up after the flood.
All right, we got a couple more before we got let me see. We got a lot of questions that came in now. All right. So who was next? All right. So Zeralath Immortal says, do the Watchers have names and do they imposter the gods? So I guess he's talking about like Semyaza and all those different names. And do they imposter the gods? Or I also think that we can get into the point that they also veil themselves as humans in some of these writings that we're going to get into, like the Book of Giants. So you could take that, Gary, about the Watchers. He says, do the Watchers have names and do they imposter the gods?
Yes, so watchers are four groups of angels. Um, Typically, it's a couple of groups that would have created most of the giants and did most of the ruling. So when I talk about watchers, biblically, that's in Daniel 4. We get these watchers that come from the throne of God. They seem to deal with religion and they seem to deal with the governance, which tends to be the seraphim or the serpentine-faced, dragon-faced angels. But the other four groups, and they're thought to be the sons of God in Genesis 6 for the most part. But we also get giants that look like lions. We also get giants that look like birds. We also get other types of giants recorded in polytheism, and the lion ones are recorded in the Bible after the flood. So typically, the cherubim have four faces: a bull, a human, a bird or an eagle, and a lion. And so typically, if they passed on their DNA, they would look just like them. So and maybe that's where the dark-haired ones come that are bigger, like with Gilgamesh after the flood versus the red hair and blonde-haired ones from the seraphim. So watchers also include the archangels, and they also include a group called the Ophanim, which are the wheel angels and the throne angels. So they're in the wheels as they're shown in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10. And these are ones that they're very similar to cherubim, but they actually have one face of a cherubim. And that Hebrew word that refers to those angels versus the wheels, but the angels within the wheels is the Hebrew word Ophan, which is why you see them show up in the book of Enoch as part of the group of watchers called Ophanim. So it shows you that there's a connection there back to the original Hebrew. So you have these four classifications of watchers, and there would be watchers that rebelled from each of those groups. And each of them have a name, just as the book of Enoch gives like Azazel, for example. And one would deduce they would have multiple names, just like Baal after the flood has multiple names, including Raphael and Rapuel and a few other transliterations like that. Also, Hadad is another name for him. And there's other names that these angels would have that would represent aspects of their power, their titles, and their authority. And so they're the ones who become the pantheon of the gods. And they're the same seven that are shown as the major ones, or the 12 of the parent gods around the world, and that there would be a hierarchy of these fallen ones in the council of the gods that rule this world. The invisible ones, as they're talked about in the Bible and the Psalms 82, the council of the gods that Satan sits at the top of in his council, which is a different Hebrew word for assembly. In Psalms 82, it's Eda, and in Isaiah 14, it is Moged or Moed in the more modern Hebrew. And two different councils, one of God that's in heaven and the council of the gods that rule this world. So yes, they do have different names. They have specific names. And Shemiyaza might be just another name for Azazel. And when you understand that they seem to be the same angel that were somehow separated, and Shemiyaza doesn't end in El like Azazel does, but Shem is the Hebrew word for renowned and fame and or infamous, and also thought to be rooted back as you take that back to the two source words. The other one is Shema or Shemaim for heavenly or heavenly ones, and Yaza is an Arabic and a Zen word for an angelic being. And so that could be a title that is a famous or infamous angel of the heavens, right? Which would be perfect for Azazel. And that you actually have in Shemiyaza a Z as part of his name actually in there, A-Z-A. So I think they're the same angel, and it could be that different sort of name or title that we've seen that were separated into two, but they seem to have the same functions and the same positions in as part of the great Satan's multiple word that's used in the book of Enoch. I think you're on mute, Ruff.
I got it. Oh, okay. Do you think Do you think Solomon's ring was a real thing, and if it's going to be used by the Antichrist?
Oh, I think they'll have something like that, because it's part of their lore, and he's going to command the demons, but he's going to do it in a way that you can cross religions and draft Solomon in as being um, not only a descendant in the pedigree that they'll present, because Solomon is son of David as part of that genealogy, but Solomon is also sort of understood as the priest aspect of the Messiah, whereas David was more the warrior aspect, and he's going to reflect both of those things. And so when you look at the MO of how the Gnostics, particularly in the secret societies, like to draft things and mix it with their mythos so that they can create a greater legitimacy, I would expect something like that, just as I would expect to see a counterfeit Ark of the Covenant as part of his complete showing, as especially after he is crowned in the temple in Jerusalem. So I would not be surprised at that. When we look at how technology is advancing, one would expect that angelic technology would have something like that. And because he's drafted as one of those priest kings, he would be considered part of the ancient tradition of the Lord of the Rings. And each of those kings not only sat at this circle or ring of kings, just as there's going to be 10 kings in the end time, that Antichrist is going to sit above after he overthrows Babylon with the help of the 10 kings who give them the power. He will rule with that ring probably as well. And if you look, there's always in the bloodlines, the kings have this ring, and it's an allegory for that ancient technology that's somehow within the crystal or the jewel of that ring.
I wonder if Trump has a special ring.
Well, if he is Antichrist, then probably yes. I don't think he's Antichrist, but
I don't think he is either, but maybe he's good. A lot of people thought he was King Solomon reincarnated when he first became president back years back.
yeah, well,
He- Maybe
he's
maybe
the
he has a
yeah.
special ring.
Yeah, he may, but he would have bought it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, he would
not
have already been
inherited it.
wielding it.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So what okay. Let me see if there's any question. A question from Colby Walker. Question. What power do you feel demons get from wicked child sacrifices? They seem to demand it, not just to anger God.
Well, I think there's many different levels that they do child sacrifice on. So, but certainly the most innocent is the most prized sacrifice, and the younger the better. And so, in that tradition of the quickening or of the drinking of the blood, the quickening is the transfer of that energy power, and the drinking of the blood receives the life that's in the blood. Is that by consuming that blood or consuming that spiritual essence in the quickening, and I think it's a combination of both. That are just sort of separated into two different allegories for their own purposes in terms of communicating, is that you would receive more power from consuming that spirit. Now, I don't think you can actually consume that spirit, but I'm not a polytheist, so it's what they believe, and it's what they do with that belief system that's important. So demons are looking to become more powerful because they are the demigods who want to be true gods. So they're always looking for more worship and more sacrifice to somehow create more power to be ascended, to be actual God level, to be raised up. Just at like some demigods like Hercules, for example, and others were raised to be godlike status. I think we covered this off to a certain degree in the last show that we did. So that's what they're always is their ultimate goal is to be like an offspring god like Osiris or Zeus, or like a parent god like El or Kronos, and gods like that, Anu.
Great answer, Gary. So let's get into well, he was Riley Rage also asked before we get back into the Book of Giants and stuff. Riley Rage asked question: Any details on Atlan Giants, the burial mounds? I think that ties in all to what we're talking about as well.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Sure.
And so when we're talking about Atlan, that's typically a Quiche Maya Aztec
Mexico, yeah.
connection, and that in the Popol Vuh and other sources after the flood, their history sort of more begins, although there would have been an antediluvian history, and I think a lot of those ruins are antediluvian sites that they just renovated and inherited. But Aztlan is kind of the bloodline of the survivors from an island in the Atlantic. So I think you have all of that serpentine imagery, which is reflective of the same watchers and dragon gods and serpent gods all around the world, and that they're settled by Quetzalcoatl in this particular example, but there's lots of different names for those watchers that provided the knowledge of civilization. And those would probably be the seven sages, but the seven immortal sages like Osiris in the Egyptian end, like Manu in the subcontinent of India, that provided knowledge to surviving humans or humans being repopulated after the flood. So I think it's directly connected. It's just a different accounting. But typically, when you're talking about that, that reaches into through the bloodlines into the antediluvian epoch. But the Popol Vuh, for the most part, is talking post-diluvian, just as the Bible talks mostly post-diluvian with a little bit of antediluvian. So I think it's an accounting that is recorded, and just as it recorded four races before the flood. And somehow those show up after the flood as well as part of that belief system as well. So, yeah, I think we need to factor in that we have a global history both before and after the flood, and it all tells about the same history, and it all talks about the same destiny. Because when you look at you know what, all that great hype in 2012, that's basically was the Aztec calendar for the age of Aquarius, which is what we talked about again with the last show, that you'll have this coming of the Antichrist and this age of Aquarius that the Gnostics and Alice Bailey, as we were making references to, starting in that Magianic year of 2025, as we discussed in the last show, would be that same age in the age of Aquarius and the water bearer that has destruction by fire that I talked about
Yeah.
opening up the show.
Yeah, that's people definitely check that out as well. If you guys didn't hear our last show, once again, we're with Gary Wayne. Everybody, this is the Space Water Podcast. You can find Gary Wayne at Genesis6Conspiracy.com if you're just joining us. And we're now going into the second hour of the show. We're going to get a little bit deeper into things, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Manichaean first version of the Book of Giants. Now this is a very interesting book. Me and Gary have talked about it over the years, and there's some interesting things I think we should bring up first, Gary, about who Enoch is, because this is a person that's key to the Giants, even in the Book of Giants. They sort of go to him to bring them their prophetic dreams that they're receiving as well. So before we even get into some of the details of the Book of Giants, can you give a little breakdown of Enoch and how he does play a role in the revelations that they get or prophecies that they're getting?
Yeah, I think explaining Enoch is really important for context. And so Enoch is recognized all over the world by different names, and I cover off some of that history, um, and from polytheists and from monotheists. So you know, he would be known as Idris in the Bible from the monotheist perspective. But he's also known as Thoth. He's also known as Mercury. He's also known by Adonis and other names like that. And there are two Enochs one of the Cain line that the secret societies and Gnostics take back to the beginning of their religion. And he wrote scripture as well, polytheist scripture, because he's the creator of mysticism, Enochian mysticism, that comes from the seven sacred sciences and the knowledge that merged from the fallen angels or the gods. And there's also an Enoch, that sixth generation, that is son of Jared and is taken to heaven. And he walked with God. And they're kind of conflated by a lot of the polytheist writings, because they look at the Sethian line as a contrived or an invented line to counterfeit the Cain line. And so they attribute all of the things of Enoch, son of Jared, to Enoch, son of Cain. So you probably have two different kinds of scriptures that are out there. So Enoch, son of Cain, he's the one who develops all of this kind of knowledge, and is the great patriarch, the one that the Gnostics and the secret societies say the technology to build the temples before the flood, not temples, the pyramids before the flood, came from Enoch's knowledge, and same with Babel after the flood. And so when we look at Enoch, we have to look at the different writings. I like First Enoch a lot, and I think that runs 99% accurate with the Bible, and there are some corruptions in there, and we don't have original complete manuscript, but I like it a lot. 2 and 3, I think, is probably more reflective of Enoch, son of Cain, than it is of Enoch, son of Jared. Book of Giants, we have only fragments of it, of the original. And then we have versions like the Manichaean one that sort of derive from the Book of Giants, but more of a conversion of the original one with the Manichaean, or the Persian writings, to be specific, the ancient Persian writings of the Aryans. And so you get a few different names and things. But in the Book of Giants, when I just look at that one separate from the Manichaean one, I see good consistency with Enoch Book 1, and I see good consistency with what the Bible would talk about. So what we want to understand with Enoch is that both Enochs are around when the giants were created, and both had a relationship with the giants. One would have preached against them, one would have been working with them. And we need to understand that when we're reading about these references to Enoch, son of Jared, and Enoch, son of Cain. So one of the keys is that if ancient knowledge is being referenced, that's going to be technology knowledge, that's going to be son of Cain. If it's sun worship, as in the Book of Jubilees, is that transition and accounting to sun worship from lunar worship, that's likely a book that's referencing Enoch, son of Cain. Enoch, son of Cain, created sun worship and the bull cult in the religion. And so we need to look at some of those markers as to discerning which are which. Now, if you're of the belief system that there wasn't an Enoch, son of Jared, then it doesn't really matter. Or if there was, it's just that that's a perversion, then it doesn't really matter. But if you're trying to understand the doctrines, you want to understand it where they're not conflicted. And it's difficult to match up Enoch 2 and 3 with Enoch 1 and the Book of Giants without conflict. So I put 2 in one category, 2 in the other category.
Yeah, that's a good point out. Even with the Aramaic and the Manichaean, like you said, the Manichaean seems to be maybe they changed some of the names to go along with some of the Iranian and local mythology of these areas, and to
They
sort of,
did.
yeah,
They did.
yeah.
Yep. They had a same accounting, but as with all cultures, just as you have different names for the different gods, or the same gods in other cultures, that would be the same for many of the demigods as well. So they would be just using the same character, but a different name that would be understood in Indo-Aryan, in the Indo-Aryan language.
So you think we should?
And Manichae was, adopted significant aspects of Zoroastrianism into his, um, you know,
Yeah.
merged sort of mysticism, right? And
Yep.
so that would have a big influence.
Yeah, like Ahriman is used in that, like, and things like that. They use those names. And I think they just like give the name Naraman sort of in the Manichaean. It's with an N, but it's the same, basically
Yeah.
the same word. So should we
Yep.
discuss first the Aramaic then, or or is it okay to
Uh,
should
I, I'm good with both. And when you look at the Lost Book of King Og, whether or not that's an accurate translation or not, that comes out of the Manichaean larger version as well. So yeah, we can do the Manichaean if you want, and then we can do the Aramaic.
all
So
right, all right.
I mean, they're similar stories. So
Yeah, what's interesting is that in the Manichaean they sort of talk about how 200 demons are coming to Earth, right? They use that more, and then they say that the Watchers descended to Earth because of the beauty of the human woman, which sort of lines up with Enoch. And some thought they could resist, but they couldn't. And then they begin having sex with the woman. The demons reveal all these forbidden arts and mysteries, and then all this Enoch warning that the coming of the 200 demons, the Watchers, will lead only to hurting speech and hard labor. And then you get down to the Watcher Semyaza, and he gives two giant sons, birth to two giant sons, and they use Saim, Sahm, or Oya, I guess that could be in the other one, and Patsam, which is Aya and Haya. And there's other demons like Yaksas, and these are basically the Nephilim. And then they come to they're talking about a god Yima, which I think, do you think they're also, Gary, that sort of goes back to the Vedic god of death, Yama?
run that by me again.
In the Manichaean Book of Giants, they start talking about in that the god Yima accepted their prayers and worship of mankind as they begged him for help. This god Yima, and I thought that that could be connected to like Yama, who's like the Vedic god of death, a solar deity.
Yeah, you could apply that to a number of different gods. So I'm I don't really have an opinion on which one that is being referenced there because it's just I don't have enough information to sort of discern that. So it's interesting though that there is that god that's named Yima.
Yeah.
Um, and and it's really hard to match up in other pantheons. So yeah, no, I've not resolved that one in my own mind. So
Yeah, and those names like Oya as Sam Sahm, those I think are good examples of the Iranian heroes,
yeah,
being put in, and even they take the Mount Hermon and they put it as the Kajim Mountains in this story,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and which is interesting. And
yeah,
then you come to the point where the giants, they're boasting that Sam and his brothers would live and rule forever because their power and strength were unequaled amongst men and all of this. And that compares to the Gilgamesh of the Aramaic. And then they come to these dreams that they're getting, which I wanted to bring up. And so the giant Humbaba in the story, uh, they're arguing amongst themselves and begin killing one another and other creatures. And then Sam and his brother are mentioned. And then Sam has this dream,
yeah.
or Saim, however you say it, where a tablet was thrown in the water. And the tablet contains three signs that have to do with battle, destruction, and woe. And Ahriman, or Naraman, has a dream about a garden full of trees in a row, and he saw 200 trees. And there's a list of proverbs that are recited then, and Naraman reports that he saw in the dream uh, that some were weeping and some were lamenting, and others were sinful rulers. And this is the part that I have a question for you now, Gary, about Enoch. So now the giant Mahaway, who's the son of Virgodad or Baraquil in the other one, he wants to seek out Enoch. And then the next part is he as he flew, now he's seeking out Enoch. So to seek out Enoch, and now is he in spirit form, dreaming? Is he already dead or something, traveling in another dimension, or traveling outside Earth, maybe in the magnetosphere area, or is Enoch a spirit being? Because listen to how he wants to seek out Enoch, and listen to what he has to do. So he wants to seek out Enoch, so he's flying now. And as he flew, he hears a voice as the sun begins to rise, warning him. So he's flying outside Earth, and there's a heavenly voice.
Yeah.
So it tells him that if he flies too high, the sun are going to set his wings on fire. And then the voice tells him that he must descend. He's going too high. Then the voice guides him to Enoch. So Enoch's somewhere between sun and the earth. And this heavenly voice is guiding him, who hails him and meets him. So and then he lands, and the voice leads him to Enoch. So I'm asking you, Gary, what's your opinion on this? Do you think Enoch is in some, because we all know Enoch never died, God took him. Now, is he in some realm between Earth and the sun? And he's able to have some sort of mediation between God and other beings? That's interesting.
Well, and in typically in books 2 and 3, is Enoch is a mediator between the gods and humans, just as Mercury is and Thoth is. And so I don't think when he's flying, he's not flying with wings. I think he's flying with technology.
It's an allegory. It's some kind of
Yeah.
metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we look at the technology that was before the flood, and they had the ability to utilize angelic technology with planet destruction capability and DNA and technology that we're just catching up to today. They would have had this type of technology to go wherever he was going, and who knows, he may have even been going into a different dimension for all we know to visit with the gods. By the chronology, as I look at it, biblically, is that Enoch, son of Jared, would have been taken to heaven already, and he doesn't come back. But Enoch, son of Cain, seems to be around even at the time of the flood. So if the giants are going in and the flood is imminent and it's coming quickly, he seems to be the one that they would be communicating with.
So this is
So
a different
when I
Enoch that
look,
they're talking about.
yes,
Yeah.
it's the conflation that we talked about. So when we look at the overlay of that Manichaean version, which is the Aryan version and the Persian version, then we're probably seeing that additional information, but from Enoch, son of Cain, versus the Aramaic one, which seems to be, even though it's talking about the same characters, the same individuals, and we don't have the whole book of Giants manuscript, which is unfortunate to compare it to the Manichaean. Then I think that is just the polytheist version overlaid on to the monotheist version that Manichae was creating a common story for his religion.
I'm glad this is awesome. I'm enjoying this broadcast. Me personally, I hope you all are enjoying it. We got 23 people in the chat room too, so shout out to everybody in the chat room. I'm glad that this is important, Gary, that this is being cleared up for people. Because very important that this people understand that there's two different Enochs, and the later books, even the second and third book of Enoch, where they're referring to different, there's obviously other people that were named these names as well. So
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, and in third book of Enoch, he is raised to angelic or son of God like status, as he's referred to
Like
in
Metatron type
third
stuff.
Enoch, just as Thoth is created and Mercury is created to God status in the Greek, and Egyptian through his knowledge and the development of that knowledge. So that's why my advice and what sort of helped me, and people can agree or disagree with how I come to my conclusions. That's why I looked at the markers as to what do we know clearly about Enoch, son of Cain, what he did, and what Enoch, son of Jared did, and use that as the measuring stick as Enoch is being named, understanding that there could be some conflation of those details as they come together.
Yeah, and wasn't there a Greek story where it was Icarus or Phaeton or one of those where
Yeah,
he was flying too close to the sun. He didn't want to burn his wings. That
yeah,
sounds awfully
yeah.
familiar.
Yeah, exactly. And same with Apollo was told not to fly, but it's Icarus that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
and
even yeah, even some of those like showdowns, like with Elijah
yeah,
and the priest of Baal, that seems very similar to other showdowns throughout history. Even with like Saint Patrick, Jesus, a lot of
yeah.
people had Moses. I mean,
When you have when you have two primary religions, and I as I move on into book one, I actually sort of talk about this, but not in great detail. But you have these two primary religions. When I say that, is like the Druids is the same religion as the Brahmins, as the same religion as Zoroastrianism, as the same Egyptian religion. It's just different cultural names and some local cultural rituals. So if you have two primary belief systems that are at odds with each other, they don't tend to coexist peacefully, right? And we've seen that throughout our history. So these great showdowns tend to be priestly representatives of each side having this duel, trying to fight for primacy over the people of that time. And those wars have been going on before the flood, after the flood, and will go on in the end time because it's going to be like the days of Noah. What was new again. So we are going to see dueling prophets in the end time. So you're going to have the false prophet who's going to bring fire down from heaven like Elijah. The false prophet is, in my understanding, the polytheist one who makes the way for the polytheist dragon Messiah. And you're going to have the two witnesses and the 144,000, but primarily the two witnesses that are going to be prophesying and doing great miracles at the same time. I expect to see this dueling sort of nature between the two in the end time, just as you had Elijah with the Baal prophets, right? And the showdown in the time of Elijah and the monarchy of Israel. And so one deduces that you had these same showdowns before the flood because it would have to have been the same. So when we start to see allegories of stories, let's say the Lord of the Rings and these great wizards and stuff that were before the flood, they have a counterpart on the other side that has power as well. Just as you have kings on both sides in that dualistic sort of understanding of it. So we should understand that there would have been, as a archetypical, a good Enoch and an evil Enoch, depending on which belief system that you're in. And this is an ongoing thing.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up too, an interesting question for you, something that we were touching on before we went live a little bit when we were talking, is these visions that the giants are discussing that they're possibly getting, that's discussed in these the Book of Giants and various other books. They're not coming from God, obviously. I mean, why would he be giving them signs of their demise if he's about to? Why would he want to make them prepare for it in any way or have them get clues for it? So obviously they're coming from another source. And do you think that the source of these visions that they're getting is the same source that today is also bringing visions to from everybody to maybe Joan of Arc, which we can touch on quick, and then even more recent, like Fatima, Medjugorje, Lourdes, things like that. They seem to be like they're visions of uh like end times visions, like prophetic visions of our demise, of chastisements coming down. And
Yeah.
these giants are getting chastisement visions. And maybe
Yep.
these are the same
Yep.
chastisement visions that these Fatima and all these people, that have been getting over the years and guiding the church.
Yeah. I think in these eventful sort of prophetic times, that would have been a prophetic time from the past. I think, you'll have, as I say, both sides. And we also had Noah at that time, that was talking about the coming of the flood and preaching not only to humans, but to the giants. One presumes he had visions as well. But the visions that are in the book of Giants are seemingly coming from the pantheon of gods, and within the ones that would have a better interest in having giants sort of survive and looking after those interests, and opposed to having all of the giants wiped out. Because again, there's that good and evil within the dualism of polytheism within the pantheon as well. And so I think when you're getting those kinds of dreams to the giants, who are then going to go to Enoch, the likelihood of those giants going to Enoch, son of Jared, is unlikely, because this is very close to the flood. He'd be in heaven already. But Enoch, son of Cain, probably lived to be over 500 years old, with how long people lived back then. And I think they went to Enoch, son of Cain, but he's basically telling them as well, like, the flood's coming. And all you can do is prepare. And so Gilgamesh says, I'm not going to prepare. I'm going to try and go into heaven and make war against the starry host, right? It's kind of like an Antichrist type move in sort of reaction. And so I think the giants and the civilizations, stored knowledge. I think they built great things to have their um, civilization. Remember, they may have partnered somehow, some way, in the earth, off the earth, to survive. But I think that's a warning coming from the pantheon. And also in that dreams, you'd mentioned the 200 trees, which is the 200 demons, which is, I think more of a polytheist term for daemon, which would be more thought of as a higher level, and two different levels of daemon spirits. Just like you have the jinn, two different classifications of the jinn in the Quran, as in Iblis and Satan, and jinn has been being demigods or genies, right? And so these would be fallen angels, and 200 of those trees. And in Eden, we have great trees. And in Ezekiel 31, it talks about these trees of Eden. Um, and I think this is a representation of those 200 that are ruling the earth, before the flood, as part of the ones that are going to create the demigods and the visible ones to rule for them. So if we bank sort of all of that, that this is visions that come through the polytheist side, just as you have visions come through the monotheist side, that both have those. They just have similar being sources, except one being the God of the Bible as the source, and the Holy Spirit, and some being provided and explained by angels, and ones that sort of come directly from different angels within the pantheon. It makes sense when you see the Sibylline prophecies, that these are probably, and other oracles like at Delphi and other places around the world, that they're receiving visions and things from their pantheon of gods that they worship. And that when you see that coming down through history, as what you mentioned with Joan of Arc, she had Mary apparitions, and that she's working heavily with the Anjou bloodline. And in this case, to free from another bloodline, but she has visions, and she is part of this long line of Mary apparitions. And that you also have Sibylline prophecies that would be acquainted with these sort of Mary apparitions. And what I mean by that is you have Mary apparitions that come down throughout Catholic history, and in numerous ways, from the Knights Templars to the Knights of St. John, into Lourdes to Fatima, Medjugorje. This is sort of a common sort of understanding. And so this could be the same woman as a daughter of Babylon or a daughter of Babel that rides the beast empires and is trying to get everybody to convert to this universal religion, is the standard sort of doctrine of these Mary apparitions. So, mother, as you take that back to its original languages of Magna and Mater, the great mother. I mean, like it's in mother, the motherland, or the great source. And the Magna Mater is the term that was used for Cybele in Rome as a queen of heaven, just as Mary is depicted as a queen of heaven. And so queens of heavens were like Isis as an offspring god, but would have had a parent god variation before the flood. You have Rhea, which would be a queen of heaven before the flood versus after the flood. Inanna was a queen of heaven in Sumeria. Rhea was in Greece. You have Ashtaroth, which was a queen of heaven before the flood with El, but Anat, the consort of Baal after the flood, would be the queen of heaven after the flood. Sophia was the mother of all gods in Gnosticism and had this sort of nebulous sort of consort. And so the Magna Mater is a sky goddess that were renowned around the world as the queens of heaven, and then recorded on the tablets of, I'm trying to remember the name, tablets of Amisaduqa, as I recall, on the Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, that's it's actually named. And Venus is also allegorized in the seven wandering stars as a female goddess, right? As opposed to being associated with Satan, except that that would be the consort of Satan that was somehow disappeared in prehistory, which is probably the female Leviathan or Tiamat equivalent. And so this Queen of Heaven on the Amisaduqa tablet is celebrated as the bright Queen of Heaven, and also equated with Diana, who was the great queen of the fairies, and as understood as complete light. I think these types of things are going to come down on the polytheist side that are going to have significant impacts in the end time. So if you look at the Medjugorje ones, they were initiated by Mary, and that woman is described exactly as in Revelation 12. So it's drafting in the Bible to sort of create that sort of legitimacy. But they're going to come out, these 6 children, with 10 catastrophic prophecies to convert to this religion or be destroyed from the face of the earth. We're going to see these kinds of prophets all around the world. And now we're seeing more than just the understanding that this is a description that is identical as described for Isis or Sophia in Gnosticism, but we are seeing and hearing now visions of Queen of Heaven mother goddesses like Isis and Hathor out of the Egyptian, and other ones from other pantheons as they are done in other religions around the world, and they all have a similar sort of story. And that can't be a coincidence. So what happened in the past, I think we see reflected as part of that within the dreams that you're talking about in the Book of Giants, but we also have that throughout the monotheist side in history, and we have that throughout the polytheist side, at least in the last 2,000 years. It was more common than what people would think about. And I cover a number of these apparitions in book 2 for people in terms of the different religions and different sightings, and show you how they're all the same.
Joan of Arc is interesting. I think she actually just threw in some of the Catholic and Christian doctrine so she wasn't burned as a witch, I think, because she like a lot of the stuff in her writing is when they write about her, it's like, um, God was telling me about Saint Catherine or Saint Margaret would come to me, and I need to follow their counsel and things like that. But and she talked about a voice coming to her, and that she was terrified at first, and it was at right when she was 13, right? And she's, and it's right about noon when the sun's at its peak, so it's a
Yep.
star communicating with her.
Yep. Yeah. And it's all on the solar sort of aspect of it.
Yeah.
So, uh, and, and Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, had Mary apparitions and was initiated and set on his commission to create the new Babylon within the Roman Church. And it's again, it's all eerily the same teachings and same kinds of doctrines. So um, I think this is something that we need to be very, very well aware of, and that's why people need to discern um, what why it's important to know our history, and whatever you side on and make that decision on, just make sure that you're making sort of clear decisions as what you're about to see, because I think I mentioned earlier, we can't imagine unless we get back into the shoes of the ancients what they saw. That's what's coming. So I think it's important to understand these things.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, we could make this a 4 hour show if we wanted to really do, but we've already been going like an hour and a half. Do you want to pick it up next time, or do you want to continue with a little bit more?
Sure.
It's up to you.
Probably pick it up next. Probably
Yeah,
pick it up
I
next time.
I
I think,
figure I
yeah,
figure
because
we should pick it up
it's
next time because I mean we could
yeah,
go all day and break down the different books, but I really appreciate it, Gary. Everybody did great. The one and only Mr. Gary Wayne. You guys can see his website is right up here, Genesis6Conspiracy.com. And it's important, guys, this is for entertainment only, like for YouTube, for you guys to listen to and enjoy, right? We're not telling you to go out there and believe everything that we're both saying at all. We're trying to intrigue you enough to do your own soul digging and to make a decision yourself. Because like Gary said, it's a great line. Making no decision is even probably worse than picking this than making it, like that's one of the worst things to make no decision. It's really bad. That's a decision in itself to make no decision. So I hope we intrigue you guys to do some digging in soul searching into your own soul and looking into some of the ancient writings to see if it sparks something in you like it has in us. And I appreciate Gary you coming on. It's really a pleasure. Hopefully next time we'll be on video. And I really appreciate the work you've done, Gary. Thank you for sharing your knowledge today.
yep. Yep, thank you. And I'll leave one little tidbit for what we might dig into deeper on all of this. But Cybele, as the Queen of Heaven, as we talked about, as one of her titles, is typically depicted in the Roman versions as sitting on her throne at Palatine Hill as the mother of gods. And then we would understand that sort of biblically from prophecy as the seat or throne of the mystery Babylon of the future,
Yeah, I
the
think we
seven
we
hills of Rome. Yep,
yeah, that's
yep,
awesome. We'll pick this up where
yep,
we went. We
yep,
could talk about the Sibylline oracles because like we have the Cumaean Sibyl, the
yep.
all these
Yeah.
Tiburtine Sibyl. There's 10 of them.
Oh
So the
yeah, there's a lot of and it was dealt in many Sibylline was in many cultures of the Mediterranean.
yeah, and they sat on all different oracle seats from Baalbek to Delphi to all these
Yeah.
places. So we'll pick it up, guys.
Yep.
Genesis6Conspiracy.com, and you can find me at the Mystical Spiral store. Gary Wayne's in the house, guys. Thank you for all.